So the good news about the microbead ban is that it gets people's attention and you actually start thinking that we have to have alternatives.
Carl, there are alarming reports of plastic in the ocean, so can you give us a bit of perspective?
Yes, over the last decade or so, we've really started focusing on the fact that a lot of the plastic we've used is ending up in the ocean. It's a pretty significant proportion. We also see plastic from new sources that we didn't really think about, like microbeads coming through, for example, toothpaste or scrubbers. Or we're also starting now to see plastic accumulating in the food chain. So if you take a place like the Arctic, there's actually three main areas that we're interested in. The first one has to do with what happens to the animals, to the biodiversity, and how it interacts with the plastic. The second part is actually related to human health. And there's clear indications that now plastic is being incorporated into the bodies of some of the animals we love to eat. Now, almost as much as half of the seafood that we eat here in Europe come from the Arctic or subarctic waters. And in the US, it's maybe 40%. So for us northern countries, this is a really big deal.
And that's actually extremely shocking. So you mentioned microbeads. Countries have actually banned the use of microbeads. But at what point can we expect this to actually take effect and have an effect?
So the good news about the microbead ban is that it gets people's attention and you actually start thinking that we have to have alternatives, right? The bad news is that it's not a universal ban. So lots of places we continue doing it. Some of the companies that are stopping using it in Europe or in the US are actually continuing to use it in their products that are sold in developing countries. And a very large part of this problem is actually still in developing countries.
And it's an issue that I'm sure a lot of people weren't actually aware of. So what can consumers such as me and you actually do to help this problem?
Well, I think we all have our duty. If we're here in Europe, and particularly a country like Switzerland, we're actually quite good at recycling, but there's still some piece of work we can do there. But looking more broadly, I think we need to look at all these products where we're currently using plastic. It could be in small amounts like in microbeads, or it could be in larger amounts, and ask ourselves, is there a substitute? Is there something I can do? What's my responsibility? Also, even looking at clothing, a lot of clothing has plastic on it. I think if we look at you and me, I'm sure we'll find plastic in half or more of the things that we're actually using. And every day, small pieces of plastics fall off our clothing and ends up going into water bodies and into the ocean sooner or later. This plastic might be there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we really are committing not just our children's generation, but many generations to come to this problem. It's really on our watch, we need to solve it.
So we've talked about the issues there, but what can the implications actually be for the industries?
I think most industries want to be responsive to consumer needs and be good citizens. And I think they're waking up to a real problem here. So part of the industry has really looked at recycling. How can we deal with closing the cycle in such a way we have more of a circular economy? So we don't have a linear economy where we produce something, we use it, and then we throw it away and waste it and fill a landfill, for example. That's a very unsustainable way. Instead, they're looking at recycling it so that the plastic would come back into use several times, and that way actually, in some ways, be more constructive way of dealing with the problem. So it doesn't get into nature, it gets put to its good use. And let's not get ourselves wrong here. Plastic is a fantastic material that solves many human needs, has improved our lives tremendously, but there are side effects, and those are the ones we need to deal with. The second part, though, is perhaps recycling isn't the solution everywhere. So one attempt has been doing bioplastics, biodegradable plastics. So the good thing about biodegradable is that over time they will actually break down into smaller pieces that will be consumed by various types of bacteria, for example, or maybe fungi or so on. The bad news about it is it could encourage people to actually throw away plastic, because in some ways you don't think you need to deal with it because nature takes care of it. The other bad thing about bioplastics is that it sort of lulls us into believing that we've solved the problem. And in fact, bioplastic mixed with normal plastic doesn't work that well, because you end up having a real problem with that. You can't actually recycle it so well. So there are some limitations in that. So that brings me to the third area for industry, which is really redesign, where we need to look at producing smarter products that actually don't produce plastic that ends up in the ocean. And here we could look at substitution, where we use other materials altogether.
Well, Carl, thank you so much for coming in today and highlighting these problems.
Thank you.
That's all once again from myself and Carl, but if you like this video, like and comment on dukascopy.tv.